programs, merit bases need-based financial aid, how we determine need-based aid, how and when to apply, and special circumstances. I suspect a number of you have joined us today hoping to learn about what happens when your financial aid doesn't meet your current financial situation. And the pandemic is weighing on everybody's mind and finances. And so in order for us to look at special circumstances, it's important to get the basics of the application process. Everyone will apply the same way as a standard through the process, and then you can talk to your individual schools to review any special circumstances. So the majority of our presentation will be on the standard application process, and it's important to have all that information correct before we can look at any alternative information in a special circumstance. And then I'll also talk about student loan options. So it's important to first look at the principles of financial aid, or the philosophical approach that schools take when reviewing applications. And first of all, to the extent that they are able, parents have the primary responsibility to pay for their dependent children's education. It's not the responsibility of the federal government or the state or the school, but we're looking at a family's ability to pay. And when we talk about a dependent student, that would be anyone under the age of 24 in most circumstances. So we'll be using parent information on applications for the typical student through their undergraduate program. It's also expected that students have some skin in the game and a responsibility to contribute to their educational costs. And so this could be from any savings that they have accumulated over the years, student loans. Some schools have a summer earnings expectation. So between academic years, student would be expected to be working and use some of their earnings to contribute. Or a student could seek employment on campus while they're a student and use those to pay for educational costs. Families should be evaluated in their present financial condition, and the rest of the presentation we'll get into what that means. And then finally, a family's ability to pay for educational costs must be evaluated in an equitable and consistent manner, recognizing that special circumstances can and do affect its ability to pay. And so here, again, it's important to note the application process helps us review a family's ability to pay, and we cannot look at a family's willingness or unwillingness to contribute as a special circumstance. So in order to review applications in a fair and equitable and consistent manner, we are looking at ability to pay. So financial aid is the funding available to families intended to help students pay for education and related expenses, including tuition fees, room and board, books and supplies for education at a college or university. And so financial aid can come in the form of grants and scholarships, which is the good stuff, the gift aid you don't have to pay back. But we also consider loans and work study a form of financial aid, and we call those self-help forms of aid. So your aid package might have a combination of these forms of aid to help you pay for college. Grants. Grants can come from the federal government, the state, or the school. They're not mutually exclusive, often can be awarded in combination. And then a student might receive a merit scholarship or a local scholarship from your school or community. And scholarships might have a specific award criteria, such as an athletic achievement or community service achievement. So Merit scholarships might come from the university as well and be based on the applicant or the application for admission. And then self-help aid. So briefly mentioned student employment. And the federal work-study program is a need-based financial aid program. It's a joint between the government and the school, providing the student the opportunity to work during the year. If a student did not qualify for federal work-study, they still may have opportunities to seek employment, but having work-study eligibility makes them a bit more attractive to employers because the students' wages are subsidized by the government. And students can use those earnings to help with those out-of-pocket pizza money, need shampoo, miscellaneous expenses during the year, or can use that to make tuition payments over the course of the year. And then student loans, and we'll get into some more detail on those, the federal student loan options. So the best student loan a student can get is the direct Stafford loan, and the subsidized one in particular. It is need-based, and the interest is subsidized while the student is in school, and repayment does not begin until 6 months after graduation, or if a student has to drop below half-time status, that their 6-month grace period begins at that point. They also have the unsubsidized loan option, which is not need-based, does not consider the expected family contribution, and the interest does begin to accrue while the student is in school. There is no loan prepayment penalty, so if a student is able to make interest payments while they're in school, they're encouraged to, and it helps later on, obviously. Below here, I have the annual loan limits, which increase a little bit each year. If a student is eligible for the full subsidized amount, they'll receive that additional $2,000 in unsubsidized loan eligibility. So if a student has $2,000 a year in loans, they might be able to make $20 in interest payments a month. That can add up and help over time. And the Stafford loan has a fixed interest rate during this current academic year of 2.75%. It's fixed, but it's variable in that every July 1st, the interest rate changes. So if a student is enrolled for 4 years and takes that subsidized loan, an unsubsidized loan for 4 years, each year it will have its own fixed interest rate. Right now, there is a 1% fee that it's an origination fee that the government takes out. So the remaining 99% or so would be applied toward the student's account. And again, it has that grace period before repayment begins. The other federal loan option is for the parent to help cover the family's expected contribution portion of their tuition and fees and expenses. It is not need-based, and the current fixed interest rate for this year is 5.3%. Again, that rate will change on July 1st each year. And the current fees are just over 4%. After those are taken off, it would leave that remaining 96% or so toward helping the students cover their bill. There's a separate loan application, studentaid.gov, and the parent would log in using the FSA ID and password that the student uses to complete or the parent uses to help sign the student's FAFSA. We'll get into FAFSA in a little bit. And of course, there are private loans as well if a family was interested in using private loans to help with their educational costs. All right. I can pause here if there are questions about loans or anything so far. Happy to. We can keep going.
I posted in the chat that if you have questions, you know, since we do have a good showing, it's so good to see so many people, that if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and Ms. Harris and I will take turns reading them. I'm just going to take a quick look. I'm not sure that there's anything yet.
Okay. We can move on for now. All right. I want to briefly talk about the difference between a merit aid or merit scholarship and need-based financial aid. I talked briefly about the merit. Your school may or may not award a student a merit scholarship, and it's important to, if they are awarded that scholarship, it's important to understand whether or not it's automatically reapplied each year, if there's a GPA requirement. At University of Rochester, for example, if someone is only eligible for a merit scholarship, they don't have to complete the FAFSA or the CSS need-based applications each year. So merit is usually different than need-based aid. In the financial aid office, I'm responsible for reviewing students' need-based applications and awarding loans, grants, work study. And these awards are subject to change each year as we review the renewed application. Now I'd like to get into what the schools do to determine financial need. And the first thing we do is define the cost of attendance. This is usually that sticker price that you'll see on the website, and it's an estimate based on actual direct fees that you'll be charged, the tuition fees, room and board, but also what we estimate that you'd pay out of pocket for the books and supplies, your transportation to and from school, and again, that money for pizza or new boots or shampoo, right? So cost of attendance is that sticker price that schools should have posted on their websites. Next, we need to define the expected family contribution. And in order to do that, we review the financial aid applications, which will include information about students' income and assets, parents' income and assets. When we talk about income, we're looking at earnings from work, any untaxed benefits, child support, and assets would be, might be home equity, other real estate value that you own, 529 accounts, trusts, any investments that are outside of retirement. We don't look at the retirement assets. And if parents are separated, divorced, or were never married, the school may look at the non-custodial parents' income and assets as well. The number of people in household is important. That will make a difference for the expected family contribution. The number of children in college and an undergraduate program, at least half-time enrolled in a half-time status, that makes a difference as well. Here's a little chart to kind of show how the parent and student information is separated out, looking at both income and discretionary assets, how those are the things that are included in the income and assets. And then the light blue boxes at the bottom are some of the allowances we make for taxes, educational savings asset protection allowance right here under the parent assets takes into consideration if you have younger siblings, younger children who are not yet in college, that we know you're saving for them as well. So it's a combination of looking at the income, but then calculating allowances to come up with the expected family contribution. And so the magic formula is taking that cost of attendance, subtracting the expected family contribution, and that gives the school your demonstrated financial need. The school may or may not be able to fill that demonstrated need with a combination of work study, grant, scholarships, and loan funding. And so some schools are, like University of Rochester, we do award both merit and need-based aid to meet full demonstrated need. Other schools just give a big merit scholarship, but it doesn't fully meet your need. And other schools, like Ivy League schools, tend to award more need-based grant funding and not so much merit scholarships. So it's important to really look at everything side by side and see if you still have, a deficit in being able to have that financial aid to meet your need. And we're going to move on to the application process now, but if you have any questions, I can pause here too. I don't see anything in the chat, so. Right. I'll turn it over to Allison.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here tonight. And like Christina said, I'm going to be presenting on the application process and a little bit more of the nitty-gritty in terms of, what kind of grants and scholarships you might be eligible for. And of course, talking a little bit about having a special circumstance and what you can do in order to present that information to any of the institutions that you apply to. So the application that really needs no introduction is the FAFSA, also known as the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Now, by completing this application, you are seeing what you are eligible for in federal aid only. So merit scholarships or any institutional aid, those are determined by other applications. This aid includes the federal Pell Grant, the federal subsidized and unsubsidized loans, federal work study, and the federal teach grant. And that's just to name a few. There are other federal funding options as well. The FAFSA is also required to be submitted if a student's parent wants to apply for a federal Parent Plus loan. Also, keep in mind, if your parents are separated and not living together, only one parent's information is required for the FAFSA. This is typically the person the student lives with the majority of the time. You'd want to go to FAFSA.gov or studentaid.gov. Either place will, or either address will take you to where you need to apply for the FAFSA. Now, when you create an FSA ID for login, it will need to be created for both the student and the parent. It's very important that neither the student nor the parent loses this information, as you'll need to use this ID and password, not just for your incoming year, but every year or every year after that as well. You will also need your FSA login information when you need to complete other necessary aid action items like completing the master promissory note or doing some sort of loan counseling. That's all still required in order to complete those necessary steps. It is available October 1st every single year for the next academic year. And another thing, as New York State residents, it links your FAFSA information to New York State TAP, which we will get into in a couple of slides. As New York State residents, the FAFSA will begin the process of your TAP application by linking that information you provided from the FAFSA to New York State. So if you're eligible for TAP, you'll still have to complete action items with New York State. But by linking the FAFSA, all you've really done is just begun the process and taken care of a few steps. Now, in terms of the chart to the side, you'll see the tax years that are corresponding with the academic year. So for students that are applying for financial aid for the 2021-2022 academic year, the FAFSA will be asking for your 2019 taxes. You cannot input alternate tax years. You're required to put the tax year that they are asking for. Now, the application deadline for each school, for early decision, for regular decision, and transfer students, they're generally all around the same, but each institution will present to you their own unique deadlines for these documents in order to come in. Christina, I'm ready to go on to the next slide. Thank you. Sorry, we're tag teaming it over here. So this is what the FAFSA page should look like before you log in. After you create your FSA ID, you'll always log in under the returning student side. When you complete your FAFSA and you have to send it off to the schools, you can only send your FAFSA student aid report, or SAR, to 10 schools maximum. So if you want to apply to more than 10 schools, a lot of times students will remove and add schools as needed in order to ensure that their student aid reports get to all the institutions that they're applying to. It's also super important to keep in mind that FAFSA is a free application. It doesn't cost any money to file. It has never cost any money to file. I don't think it'll ever cost any money to file. If you ever are prompted to pay to file your FAFSA, you're probably not at on the right site. So the student aid report, or SAR, as I previously said, it's a document that provides you with some basic information about your federal aid eligibility, as well as a complete rundown of the students and the parents' answers to the FAFSA questions. And this is what gets sent to each individual school. And we have access to all that information. Now, beyond federal aid, if you're an eligible New York State resident attending a New York State school, here are some state grants that you might be eligible for. You might hear it as HESC, also known as Higher Education Services Corporation. That's New York State's Department of Education, essentially. The largest New York State grant that a student could potentially be eligible for is TAP, or Tuition Assistance Program. Recipients of this award are really any New York State student attending any New York State post-secondary institution, and they meet the financial and residency requirements, such as your federal, your taxable income, and if you've lived in the state for a certain amount of time. And again, as I previously stated, that information is being linked from the FAFSA to get that application process started for you. Now, the next two scholarships I'm going to talk about, the Excelsior Scholarship and the Enhanced Tuition Award, or ETA. Those are relatively new. A key feature of these tuition-specific scholarships is that the student needs to remain in New York State after graduation for the same amount of time it took for the student to complete their degree. So, in other words, that means if it takes a student 4 years to complete their degree, they have to remain in New York State at least 4 years post-graduation. If they do not stay in New York State for that minimum amount of time, then that scholarship turns into a loan. Now, the Excelsior Scholarship is for students that are attending the SUNY, CUNY, or any sort of New York State community college. And the Enhanced Tuition Award is really meant for the private colleges that are participating in New York State. Not all private colleges in New York State are participating in this scholarship. Now, some other New York State benefits, some of them are the veterans and family benefits. These kind of mimic the federal VA benefits that some families are eligible for. The most common one is the VTA benefits. This is state funding for students that are veterans themselves. So typically, you're reaching an older student population at that point. Another benefit that is available through students in New York State is merit, also known as Military Enhanced Recognition Incentive Tribute. This scholarship provides financial aid to children, spouses, and other financial dependents of members of the military who at any time after August 2nd, 1990, died or became severely or permanently disabled. This scholarship is also available to those folks that served after August 2nd, 1990, and have since become severely and or permanently disabled. And lastly, of the New York State Veterans Benefits is the RIRP, also known as the Recruitment Incentive and Retention Program. It is designed to recruit and retain members of the military. In exchange, they will pay the cost of tuition up to SUNY tuition rates. Another incentive program that they have is the New York State STEM program. A lot of students typically try to take advantage of this program. Some of the requirements in order to be eligible for that scholarship is that a student needs to be in the top 10% of their graduating class. They must be pursuing an approved STEM degree program at their higher education institution, and they must agree to live in New York State for 5 years post-graduation. This award can amount up to SUNY undergraduate tuition charged for New York State residents. And by no means, this list is not exhaustive of what New York State can potentially offer you as long as you attend a New York State school. We encourage you folks to to go to the website we provided, hesc.ny.gov/payforcollege.html. From there, you'll be able to view additional scholarship opportunities, as well as get down to the nitty-gritty of what each benefit and scholarship requires of you in terms of eligibility. Now, in terms of institutional aid, which is separate from federal and state benefits, the most commonly used application to determine need-based institutional aid eligibility is the CSS profile, which is funded in part by College Board. So the same folks that did your SATs is College Board. College Board also does the CSS profile as well. Now, not all institutions that have their own funds to give out to students require the CSS profile, so you need to keep that in mind. The website is cssprofile.org, and it's available on October 1st each year, just like the FAFSA. And just like the FAFSA, it's going to be using 2019 taxes for the 2021-2022 academic year. Unfortunately, the CSS profile does cost money to apply. It's $27 for the first school and $16 for each additional school that you want to apply to that requires the CSS profile. Now, a lot of times the CSS profile fee will automatically be waived if your PSAT or SAT fees were waived, or based on the financial information provided on the CSS profile, it deemed that you qualified to have those fees waived. Now, if it's not automatically waived, but the cost is not feasible for a student, some schools may have access to additional waivers. Not all schools have this though, but we always encourage students to reach out. Now, also unlike the FAFSA, when we're only really, if in a situation where a student's parents are separated, and we're only taking one parent into consideration for the FAFSA, the CSS profile will take the non-custodial parent's information into consideration. They will need to complete their own separate profile and potentially provide additional financial documentation at the request of the school. Now, if getting the non-custodial parent to complete the application is not in the realm of possibility, for example, there's absolutely no contact, then there is a special appeal process to get this profile waived. The non-custodial profile waiver process and approval is at the discretion of each school it is submitted to. So if your non-custodial parent profile waiver appeal is approved at one school, it doesn't mean it's going to be approved at all schools. It's at the discretion of each school. So this is what it looks like when you apply for the CSS profile. It's important to note here, as you can see, they have a direct way to look up, divorced or separated families. In the upper right corner, you can see for divorced or separated families, they have that up there. Another thing to take into consideration is that you more than likely will need to make corrections to your applications, both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. It's very common. For folks that have already completed the CSS profile, you probably already know this, that you really only have one shot to get the CSS profile right. At that point, if you do need to make corrections, schools, you can submit corrections directly to the school. Now with the FAFSA, you have the ability to go in and log in with your FSA ID and make adjustments as necessary. So at least one application, you can go in and make the necessary adjustments. CSS profile, you really only have one shot, and then from there, you have to make the necessary adjustments by corresponding with the folks at the institution. Now, here are some additional requirements that you might have to oblige schools with, one of which is the IDOC, or institutional documentation. And this is typically used by schools that require the CSS profile to be completed. They will have students upload additional financial information to this. Essentially what it is a document management portal. Now, not all institutions that require the CSS profile use IDOC. A lot of institutions have their own document management system. Another common thing that a lot of students do run into is the federal verification process. That is essentially the FAFSA, your student aid report is selected by the Department of Education for that academic year. About 1 in 3 students are selected annually, and it's really not necessarily because a family did something wrong or completed their FAFSA incorrectly. It's just Department of Education just wants to confirm that you accurately reported your household size and income information as correctly as possible. You may also be prompted as well to complete sibling enrollment verification. A lot of times students will have siblings that are also in college at the same time. A lot of institutions will have their own document that they would want you to complete or have the siblings institution complete, as a lot of times federal and institutional aid eligibility can be impacted by how many dependent children in a household are in college at the same time. So that's something to keep in mind. So exactly how much will you pay? The best way to find out as prospective students is to do the net price calculator at each institution's website. Every school that you will apply to will have what is called a net price calculator. It's a great resource for prospective students and families when cost is a major deciding factor for where to attend. It's not a financial aid offer. However, it can help gauge a family's financial strength. It can give families an idea of what they could potentially be qualifying for in terms of need-based aid. And it can provide families with an anticipated estimated family contribution or net price cost. As I previously stated, all schools are required to have their own version of a net price calculator on their website. So while it may seem like the financial aid process is really only going to look at one set of circumstances, like this is what your situation is for 2019 and there's no way around it, every institution has their unique policies and procedures to handle special circumstances for when your family situation is truly no longer being captured on either application. Some of these unique situations are like a parent losing a job, extraordinary unreimbursed medical expenses, the death of a parent divorce or separation, natural disaster like hurricanes or tornadoes, or, and most topical, a pandemic. Now, for many students, their income, the income that their families made in 2019 did not carry through in 2020 due to the pandemic. And unfortunately, there is no collective set path forward for schools to handle this nationwide predicament. So while the FAFSA and the CSS profiles have added a special circumstance box related to COVID this year to help aid students to kind of explain their situation further, because the federal Department of Education and College Board both recognize that this is an ongoing issue. It is ultimately up to the student and family to reach out to the schools they applied to see if their special circumstances were taken into consideration once they received offers from these schools. Now, if these schools have taken yours or can take your situation into consideration, they might have you formally appeal your financial aid offer. Now, appealing your financial aid offer a lot of times includes contacting your financial aid counselor. It includes submitting a written appeal as well as providing supporting documentation. A lot of times it'll be, at least for this year, a lot of people will be supplying their 2020 taxes, maybe estimations for what 2021 could look like. And then ultimately what some schools do, U of R included, is, University of Rochester, the appeals reviewed in a committee format for approval and denial. Sometimes they will do that to make sure that they're approving these appeals as fair and equitable as possible, and make sure that, you know, this, to ensure that that, you know, we're granting aid accordingly. So once accepted, you got in, that's amazing, congrats, but now what do you do? That's when the decision making really begins. The best advice we can give you folks is to reach out and ask questions. Read everything carefully, compare the multiple offers you're going to get, because they're going to get a lot of offers. You're going to want to ask as many questions as possible, do as much of the work up front as possible. Explore the institution's financial aid website, and if they have a financial aid handbook, really read through it. You definitely want to ask questions that that really talk about the differences between offers between schools. From there, you really will see that every school does things just a little bit differently. A big thing that we want to drive home is that your financial aid package that you're granted as a prospective student, it's only good for that 1 year. Every single year after that, you have to reapply for financial aid. So basically, if you have a really good financial aid package for the first year, it would very much be helpful for students and families to ask, okay, what would my aid look like in year 2, year 3, or year 4? Because at that point, we might have one more child in college, or actually we'll have one child out of college, and hey, I had a really big bonus that 1 year, but now I'm not going to have it this year, or vice versa. So that's something that you'd want to reach out and kind of confirm with these folks to say, hey, you know, our situation might not be exactly the same year to year. I want to make sure that, you know, this is what we can anticipate. Another thing you'd want to ask questions about is if your student has a lot of outside scholarships that they're bringing in with them, you'd want to ensure what that impact would look like. Some colleges may adjust their original financial aid offer if they know that you're bringing in outside scholarships. Some other things that you would also need to, you know, verify once you get accepted is there any outstanding documentation I need to provide the school in order to have my aid disperse? At least at Rochester, we will package students, and then there will be some stuff that we will make a requirement for in order for their loans to disperse. So we give them a financial aid package, but they have like the little odds and ends, so to speak, aren't really required until the student actually deposits and is admitted. Or no, they're admitted, but we don't require them to provide any additional information until they're admitted, so that they can make a decision in a timely fashion. And that is it for me and Christina's presentation today. Now we're opening the floor to questions.
Okay, so I have some questions in the chat. I'm just going to read them. Let's see. We are recording this session. That was the first question. From Carol, the question is, I have a question about the need assessment. When they consider assets, would your primary home and its value be considered? For example, how is it different if you own a home versus rent? Thank you.
I can take that. Yeah, so the CSS profile as compared to the FAFSA is kind of like the FAFSA on steroids. So the CSS profile will ask a lot more questions pertaining to assets. You won't have to put anything about home equity on the FAFSA, but you will put home equity information on the CSS profile. If you're renting on the profile, it does say I'm renting, and it will ask for what you pay each month in rent. But home equity it does have a weight on the CSS profile for reviewing need-based eligibility at institutions that offer that. That answers your question.
Okay, I will get the next one. Whoops, I answered this question, but I'll repeat it so the experts could answer. Which is better, FAFSA or CSS? So my response was that, well, why don't you guys just unravel that, because it is very confusing.
I can take that, sure. I've never had it asked quite that way, which is better. They're different. So as we've just explained, the FAFSA determines federal aid eligibility. If a school is asking for a CSS profile, it provides an opportunity for additional financial aid and funding to help with school. So it might open the door for more financial aid opportunities. But that's not to say that a FAFSA only school won't offer you a great merit scholarship. So I wouldn't shy away from applying from a CSS profile school. Really depends on everyone's unique situation. So
I would say in both instances, they both give you an opportunity to get free money, either with the federal Pell Grant or federal work study, or if the institution has any institutional aid to give folks. I mean, it's basically two different types of aid that both applications are looking to grant students. So I personally, I don't really have a preference between the FAFSA or the CSS. Lots of people will say the FAFSA is more straightforward and to the point. CSS profile is going to look into way more information than the FAFSA is going to, and that's the biggest thing that a lot of people do mention when they first start applying for colleges, and one of them needs a CSS profile to be done. They'll say, wow, the CSS profile is really getting into the nitty-gritty of my financial life.
Allison and Christina, may I just clarify by saying, I think, so you will find a scenario where you do the FAFSA, but not the CSS, but you can't pick one over the other. The school tells you, this is what we use, this is the date that we want it by, and some schools even have their own form. They could even have a third form. Is that correct, or correct me if I'm wrong?
No, that's correct. Thanks for clarifying that. Yes, thank you.
Good. No problem.
Every school, every higher education institution in the United States, if you want to get financial aid, you have to do the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is if you want to see what you're eligible for anything at all, you have to do the FAFSA. The CSS profile is an add-on for colleges that have maybe bigger endowments or grant funding to give to their students. And again, not every school does the CSS profile that has institutional funds. So it's really, again, it's up to the school.
Can I pause and add something here too? Allison, we didn't talk about IRS data retrieval as part of the FAFSA. I think we both forgot about that. We should mention,
yes,
for the FAFSA. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to?
I mean, essentially, I mean, I guess we could tag team this, but I mean, the IRS data retrieval tool is basically, it's linking your 2019 tax information to the FAFSA. So you don't have to sit there and hold your 2019 taxes and input that information directly. They will pull that information directly in from the IRS. So if your information is selected for verification on the federal side, and you have linked your information with the IRS data retrieval tool, that effectively takes care of a verification requirement. Christina, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and it's only for the FAFSA. You can't use IRS data retrieval on the CSS profile. If your marital status is different as of the day you complete the FAFSA than the tax filing status that you used, you won't be able to use the IRS data retrieval in that situation. So it doesn't work for everybody. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it, but it will help if you can do it in the long run.
Okay, so the next question, do parents use the same FAFSA ID or password created when the eldest child applied to college now that the second child is applying?
Yes, a parent can use their FSA ID for multiple children applications. So each student has to have their own FSA ID and password, but a parent can sign each of their children's applications with their own. They don't have to create a new one for each of their children.
This is a good. Is there, Michelle Katz, is there a list of questions to guide us? What would be helpful to ask?
I think, yeah, I mean, in terms of like what to ask colleges when you get your offers. So I believe beyond what I said in the presentation, another thing to think about would be maybe something with RA credits. If a student was to become an RA, what does that look like? Christina, do you have any other questions that?
Sibling enrollment is a big thing. Outside scholarships. Schools often have a portal that students can log in to view all their information. So you might even actually find a lot of the information you're looking for as you read through that. I don't have a list of set questions available to ask your counselor, but it's really having a sense of your financial situation long term, and if you expect things to be different, you could reach out, and the aid counselor might be able to give you some guidance.
Yeah, Christina and Allison, I think you both made a very important point. So I don't have children and I never sent one to college. It sounds very expensive. But I think the really most important point and a question that you raised was, how do packages change from one year to the next? You might get some kind of outstanding financial aid package because we as guidance counselors handle transfers when kids transfer, and a lot of times they don't get the repeat package. So I think that's like number one in the top like 3 questions, how they repeat, or if is there data and statistics on how much it drops by what percent, and that type of thing.
Yeah, I would tell families you're not making a 1-year decision, but hopefully a 4-year commitment, right, financially.
You also have to keep in mind that the algorithms that go into the needs analysis, they are updated on an annual basis. So you could have these exact same information year after year after year, but I can guarantee you your estimated family contribution wouldn't be spot on year after year after year, because the algorithms do change a little bit.
Okay, so I think I have the next one. from Eileen. What GPA, SAT, or other criteria, pardon my yelling child in the background. Let me say that again because he threw me off. What GPA, SAT, or other criteria qualify a student for a merit scholarship at Rochester?
So students who are awarded merit at Rochester are competing against the application pool. So the standards could change from year to year, and so you're really, competing against, like I said, the application pool. I work alongside of admissions, but I don't have that information about exact scores that enable certain scholarship amounts. I do know about half of the admitted class is awarded a merit scholarship at Rochester. That's about all I can say about that.
The approach is very holistic. They look at everything. The application, from my understanding, is very, very, very robust. And I believe, Christina, they have gone to recently a test optional, correct? Yeah. So that is also on the table now at Rochester, where the test scores kind of are not as, they're not necessarily center stage as much for some students.
Let me just unmute. Lee, I came on late, so if this was covered, please ignore me and I will look it up later. But what is the time frame for FAFSA typically? I guess the deadlines.
Oh, it'll vary from school to school, so you'll want to check the school's website. Early decision at University of Rochester, for example, is December 1st, and then regular decision students February 15th. So you want to check the school's website for that deadline. And if it is available October 1st each year for the following academic year.
Okay, so we have another question. Do you have some sense of range, 92, 98, 1400? This is from Eileen, who asked before about GPA, SAT, other criteria to qualify for merit scholarship.
Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, so there are some colleges where admissions and financial aid are kind of in the same department, or they do the same thing, same with like financial aid and the bursar's office. They're all kind of like what they call a one-stop shop. At U of R, our admissions department is completely separate from our financial aid and completely separate from our bursar. So while we work alongside with admissions, a lot of what they are doing in terms of how they decide or what is like the threshold for letting a student in or not letting a student in is it's not really something that me or Christina are really knowledgeable about. If you want, Christina, you could probably give you Rochester's the admissions email address, and maybe they could definitely point you in the right direction.
I'll put it in the chat. I'm just going to look it up.
Okay, right.
I have a question as the counselor and as just an individual. It's probably a doozy of a question, and I know you touched on it, and whatever you can share without my or us as a school being too invasive. So when you had that list of unusual circumstances and you said pandemic, well, here we are. Whoever thought we were going to live through such a thing? How are you guys bracing for this onslaught of appeals that you know is going to come? And what are your colleagues saying? And an addendum to that question, because we invited the other grades, what might the trickle effect be? This is going to end, please God, soon, but this is going to end. But what might be the trickle effect for those 11th grade families and 10th grade families? Give it a stab. I'll shut up now again.
Well, yeah, there is a lot that goes into it, right? When we look at the 2020 year income, some people received, if they were unemployed, received some unemployment benefits. So some folks were able to remain whole or close to whole during that time. Some people maybe were kind of in a furlough situation where they have been re-employed again, or will be in the coming months. And so, 2020 income will catch up with them when they get to that academic year where we use that that tax year. But if 2020 has started this, unemployment that remains through, so you'll get an aid package for seniors that are seniors this year. They'll get an aid package by April. If they remain unemployed for most of 2020 through that time, it would be something that you want to have your 2020 taxes completed as soon as possible, because that will help in having an accurate alternative tax year for us to use on appeal. For those who are juniors right now, they'll be using their 2020 tax year when they start as first year students. And then sophomores will be using 2021. So, we'll get to a place where we're using 2020 for everybody. And Rochester is committed to meeting, need, and understands that that's why we reevaluate need every year. And so we'll be able to look at 2020 for what it is for those who, are starting their first year next year and are still struggling. But we're looking at assets as a snap in time, and then at tax year we have some flexibility to look and see if we can help a family out. I don't know if that's answered your question. In terms of what other schools are doing and colleagues, I don't know. I don't have a great pulse on that, but it's worth reaching out and just asking the school, and why not? They might not be able to do anything now. They might say, come back to me in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, and maybe we can do something for you then too. So it's all about timing. And again, as Allison said, very individual to the institution.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have a couple more questions that came up in the chat. I know we're getting close to 7.
We're fine.
Okay, so from Carol Holyoke, do you have any advice regarding applying for early decision and navigating aid, considering you won't know what you will be awarded before you commit?
So I can take that. So in terms of applying early decision and navigating aid, this is kind of a conversation we have. I mean, as Christina and I, we have quite frequently with families trying to navigate early decision. From a financial aid standpoint, or at least from that standpoint, your financial aid is going to be based off of 2019. If that is an issue, then, because again, early decision, it means you're going to go to that school no matter what. That is, you've signed a contract, it's binding. You're going to go to this school no matter what the situation entails. You're going to make it work regardless of the financial aid package or not. So sometimes when I have families that are trying to decide, should I do early decision? I don't know about the aid package. My typical answer to that is, if you are concerned about if you don't want to be bound to this school because of finances, then maybe early decision isn't the best route. And it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks, and rightfully so, because especially if your child really wants to go to that institution and it's so far out of the realm of financial possibility, and that the only way it could work is if this financial piece moves here, and you just want to do early decision because that's counseling wise, that's probably, you know, what you've been told to do, and, or, you know, and rightfully so, because again, early decision, just, you know what you want. So, however, if the sticker, if the price point is the biggest thing for you, then early decision, you've committed to the college. You've committed to the college, and you've said, I'm going to come here no matter what the aid package is. That being said, that doesn't mean that a special circumstance can't be taken into consideration, but that also puts it on the table that if your special circumstance doesn't get taken into consideration, you're still supposed to be going to that school.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions left, and then we're going to just cut it off there. So Alice, quick, that's a nice, easy question. Does U of Rochester use CSS in addition to FAFSA?
We sure do. We sure do.
All right. Well, next question. So this is an interesting one. What about the impact of COVID-19 on university budgets? Will that curtail the amount of aid that may be available? It's a lot of predicting the future, but you know, what do you take a stab at it?
And it'll be on a school by school basis. But some of those decisions are made at a higher college level, not so much the financial aid office, obviously. Yeah, I guess it is a possibility if schools are feeling pinched or there are shortfalls, it could be. At Rochester, I think we would do our best to not have that happen. I wish I could speak more to it.
Well, I see that Christina was the last post about thank you for putting the admissions email, and we thank you both, and Ms. Fiore and Ms. Teslick, and parents and students. Every week we send out that high school counselor week, which is a compilation of news articles of what's happening. There's a financial aid section. Please read that weekly, or just skim it at the very least, to stay in the know. It's all synthesized in one place for you, what's happening in the college landscape. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
So much, Allison and Christina.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right, Ms. Teslick, I think we're good. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. We really, really appreciate your help with this.
Of course, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Be well. Be well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you too.
You stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.